Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1993. We're going to be taking a look at Foreigner and they're going to be playing through Waiting for a Girl Like You. So let's get the guys up on screen and see how they get on. I'm just going to jump in here. This song is so difficult to jump into because it's such a great performance, and Lou Gramm on lead vocal, when he's singing, you just want to listen to him finish the song, and that goes for every single song that you hear him sing, but also this whole set. I'm going to put the link to this in the description below so you guys can check out the whole concert if you want to, because he had one of those voices that just went on and on and on in terms of limitless tone and range. And just when you think that he's going to take his foot off the accelerator just to recover a little bit between tracks or between vocal phrases, he'll then just lean into the sound again, and it was never not there, which is sometimes you get used to hearing singers straining for notes. But Lou Gramm just has that ability to hit these notes night after night relentlessly. I want to point out as well, right at the beginning of this video, you'll see Mick Jones running across the front of the stage, because in the previous track, which was Head Games, he was playing guitar and now he has to switch to keys, so he has to get rid of the guitar. But for some reason, the guitar tech is over the other side of the stage. So it means that Mick legs it across the front of the stage, and we're on a shot that we're quite zoomed out. But if you look, the light actually follows him. So they totally give it away that he's got to get rid of his guitar. And then he has to sprint back for the keys to then come in, because the great thing about the setup that they've got live is that Mick can play keys as well, so they can have two keyboards going, which is essential for this particular track in order to have the lead run that's going on, but also that really thick synth in the background just holding those chords to fill in that space. And that's what we're hearing whilst Mick is doing his world record attempt at sprinting across the front of the stage. It's good that Mick didn't have to come in with any backing vocals instantly, because he certainly would have been out of breath, but Jeff Jacobs on keys, just holding that chord, as I said, building the mood. And by the time that Mick does get back, the backing vocals with Foreigner were always stellar. But you had this guy at the front of the stage called Lou Gramm, who was just crazy good as a vocalist. And this is a great example of his vocal ability, but also how it might fly under the radar, what he's actually doing here in terms of the control of the vocal, the dynamic range that he's exploring within this whole song and throughout all of the songs that Foreigner used to perform in the studio and live. But the vocal range, full stop, because in the verses, we are at C, and when I say that, we're at C4, and then by the time we've got to the chorus, we're at C sharp 5, which is over an octave above where we started. And people that watch this channel regularly, and people who have been watching for quite a while, will know that the dynamic impact you get from a vocal that changes an octave between the verse and the chorus is always gonna be so dramatic, and it has been in so many songs. But the beauty about this particular song, by the way, great songwriters, Mick Jones and Lou Gramm together, they're actually in the Songwriters Hall of Fame because of that ability. But looking at this particular track, it's the journey that we go on, not only how well it's been put together musically and the melody that's in there, but also just the basic pitch, because you've got the luxury of having Lou out front there being such a unique and quality vocalist. It means that in the verse, you can start an octave lower than where you want the top of that mountain to be in the chorus. And the pre-chorus is a step up. It's halfway between the verse and the chorus. So having this gradual increase in pitch between the verse into the pre-chorus and then into the chorus means that we've gone on a journey melodically, but also we're upping the ante. The impact of changing that pitch, increasing the whole time, is going to make it so interesting to listen to. And by the time you get to that chorus, that is the peak of the pitch. It's something that so many hits over the years have followed, almost a recipe in order to build the tension throughout the verse, the pre-chorus, and then release it in the chorus by hitting your highest pitch. A great example here, but the melody, that's the killer. That's the thing that no matter how great your dynamic is and how great your journey is in terms of pitch, singing-wise, you've got to have a melody that connects with an audience. And Foreigner always had that. Very few bands actually ever have that luxury of having a singer who can just take you on that journey dynamically and pitch-wise, because of having that octave difference between the verse and the chorus. And we've all seen performances of bands whose singer want to go an octave higher in the chorus but just can't quite get there, and it can be sometimes painful to watch. But when you've got the luxury of Lou out the front there, he can just nail this vocal night after night. Technique-wise, something to listen out for when Lou's singing is the exhalation after finishing vocal phrases, because to me, this indicates that he's got air to spare. And that's exactly what you want to do when you are singing high in your range. You don't want to be blowing loads of air across those vocal cords, because that's what will cause fatigue. And it's what has caused fatigue in lots of other singers in other bands. But because he's got so much air left over, it means that he's using the minimal amount necessary in order to get these notes to resonate. And it's such an important thing, so you can listen out for that. And also the way that in the verse he's singing into the mic, and you can see his mic position isn't drastically different to when he's singing at the top of his range. This indicates to me that when he is getting up there in his range and having that raspy sound to his vocal, he's not achieving it through strain and blowing loads of air across the vocal cords. It's actually a relatively quiet sound, and you would be surprised at how quiet the sound is, even though it sounds like it isn't quiet. But that is the trick. That is the beauty of great technique in the top singers. If he wants to hold a note and apply vibrato to it in a controlled way, he can do that. But he can also end lines with a really cool throwaway blues line or a trill. He's got all of that ability. He's also got a voice that is consistent throughout his range. It doesn't sound like he's singing in chest voice and then in mixed voice and then in head voice and then in falsetto. You don't hear any changes, and it is so difficult to get to that stage. I could analyze this song for years, and I think this video is already going on long enough just talking about Lou at the front of the stage, let alone the rest of the band. But the song is so well composed, having the keys solo effectively instead of a guitar solo. This is something that bands fell into the trap of, putting in, especially in the 80s, a guitar solo where it wasn't really needed, because we've already got a great melodic line on the keys that is effectively a solo that has Lou doing a little bit of vocal phrasing and extemporization over the top, but it's fundamentally a fixed solo in the song on keys, and it fits it so well. Everything in this song is there by necessity, and nothing has been shoehorned in to try and show off an instrumentalist's ability, whether it be a drum solo or a lead guitar solo, because the song doesn't need it. And that is Foreigner in a nutshell. The songs are what it's all about, putting together a perfect song, making a journey out of a song, and anything that's in there that doesn't make sense or is excessive will get cut because it's not needed. But this video, I can already feel, is going to go on for ages. We're going to be getting back into the video. Just a quick fact before we do: this particular track got to number 2 in the charts, and it stayed there for a record 10 weeks. Every other song ever has gone down the charts or maybe risen up to number 1, but Waiting for a Girl Like You got stuck at number 2 for 10 weeks. So an interesting little fact, but let's get back into this performance. And there we have it. How many times have you been to see a band where you are expecting to hear a very particular vocal melody from the singer, but when it gets to that point, they dodge that high note, or they can't hit it the same. They're a little bit flat and they're straining. But Lou Gramm always gave you the notes that you wanted to hear and more. He has that ability to take the vocal to a totally different place and just melt your face with his vocal range. Just when you hear the line you want to hear from that original record, he'll then throw it up another tone or even another couple of tones. Just so effortless with his range and so consistent the whole time. Having a singer like Lou is a massive advantage. If you're a great band already, there's no point having a great singer if then the band can't play. And it's interesting how Mick got in touch with Lou, because you might think that they went to college together and that's how Foreigner started up. But it was far from that, because Mick, always having been the leader really of Foreigner, was looking for a singer, and he'd auditioned 40 or 50 singers and was having a nightmare. He couldn't finalize the lineup. So he looked out an album that he'd received, and it was called Black Sheep in terms of the band. And this was Lou Gramm's band. Lou had handed this album to Mick when Mick was playing live with another band, and Lou just happened to be in the crowd. And like a lot of amateur musicians do, they see a band live and they hand over their album hoping that they'll listen to it and they'll get a break. So Mick listens to this album and realizes that's the guy that I want to sing for the band, having been through all of these auditions with other singers. So he flew Lou to New York City in order for him to complete the lineup, and at that time they were a 6-piece. So they recorded a demo and proceeded to do what all the bands did, just distribute them to as many record labels as possible. At this time, their band name was Trigger. So it just so happened at Atlantic Records, an A&R guy was walking past a desk and he saw on the table Trigger on this tape. And he'd just been to see a band called Trigger, and he knew that this tape wasn't of the band that he had just watched, so he had to listen to it to see what this other Trigger band were like. And he was blown away by this tape, because it was fundamentally the Foreigner debut album, but in a demo. So he went to the president of Atlantic Records and he said, there is at least one hit on this demo tape, so we've got to get in touch with these guys. And sure enough, they did, and they were signed to Atlantic Records, but they changed the band name to Foreigner. And the reason for that was because of the 3 American members of the band and the 3 English members of the band. So it meant that at any one time in any country, one of them was going to be a foreigner. That A&R guy certainly knew what he was talking about, because when they released the self-titled debut album in 1977, it sold over 4 million copies and it stayed in the top 20 of the album charts for a year. They toured theatres, selling out basketball arenas as well, and he was right, that album did have at least one hit on it. Cold as Ice was from that album, Long Long Way From Home as well, and Feels Like the First Time. They followed it up with Double Vision in 1978, and that was another huge album that sold over 5 million copies. Next in 1979 was Head Games, and that sold over 3 million copies, so still massively successful, but it was seen obviously as a decrease in sales, and the reason for that has been stated as possibly the album cover that they had, which was a woman in a male toilet rubbing her number off the wall. For some reason, back in the late 70s, it wasn't seen as a particularly good or family-friendly cover, I guess. I'm not sure why, but for some reason, the songs were banned on particular radio stations just because of the cover. So they didn't get as much exposure for that particular album with radio airplay, and that might have contributed to the lower sales figures. And this was around the time as well that Ed Gagliardi was fired from the band, because he was starting to want to play songs his own way and have more of an artistic freedom with the songs. And like I did mention earlier in this video, These songs are composed in such a way that they have to be performed that way, and I'm sure that Mick and Lou were very strict with their own compositions and exactly how they wanted them to be played in the studio and live. So in 1980, Al Greenwood and Ian MacDonald were fired from the band, and I think this was due to different band members wanting to go in different directions musically, but Mick wanted to keep control of the direction with the writing, and I'm sure Mick and Lou had a very clear direction in how they wanted the band to sound and the direction that they wanted to go in. And Mick certainly was vindicated in 1981 with the release of 4, because that sold over 7 million copies when it was released, and it stayed at number 1 for 10 weeks. And that is the album that this particular song, Waiting for a Girl Like You, comes from, and that was a massive hit. Agent Provocateur was released in 1984, and on that album we had the first and only number 1 single from Foreigner, and that was I Want to Know What Love Is. And then at that point Mick also got into producing as a little side project. He thought he'd dabble in that, and he produced acts such as Van Halen and Bad Company and Billy Joel. So not a bad little sideline. He obviously had a talent for it. In 1987 is when Inside Information was released, and that included the hit single Say You Will. And towards the end of the 80s, this is when Lou was starting to work on his own solo projects, and eventually 1990 is when Lou left the band and Johnny Edwards then came in on lead vocal. When they released Unusual Heat in 1991, unfortunately that was their worst performing album. They only got to number 117 in the charts. But Lou would be back in the band pretty soon, because due to a twist of fate, Mick and Lou were in a hotel room for longer than they had planned, which meant that they could work out the differences and start to talk about the future and start things up again with Foreigner. The reason they were in this hotel room for so long was because it was during the LA riots, and they were stuck in the Sunset Marquis Hotel because there was a citywide curfew. So none of them were allowed to leave the hotel, so they had a lot longer together than they had planned, and it allowed them time to talk about things. They released The Very Best and Beyond in 1992, which was a greatest hits album, but it did have 3 new tracks on it. Mr. Moonlight was released in 1994, and at the end of the 90s was when Lou had surgery. It was 1997 on a brain tumor, so unfortunately he took a bit of time to recover from that, and the medication that he was taking was making him gain weight, but also weakening his vocal cords. So in 1998, he did return to singing, but was visibly struggling because of what he had been through. But fortunately, he did recover, and in 1999, they went on tour and opened up for Journey on that tour. Lou left the band in 2003, and at this point, Mick decided to take a bit of time off. In 2004 is when he finalized his next lineup, and that included Jeff Pilson from Dokken and also Jason Bonham on drums, and in 2005 is when Kelly Hansen joined in for that lead vocal position. Obviously, Foreigner have had a lot of personnel changes, and it's impossible for me to cover everything in this video, but just quickly, they did release Can't Slow Down in 2009, their most recent album, and that debuted at number 29 in the charts, so that did really well. But as an overall band, selling over 80 million records worldwide and having that consistency in the charts for the period of about 11 years, from the late 70s into the 80s, they had 6 albums that just had constant hits on those albums. You'd always get 2 or 3 hits with a Foreigner album, and that was such a rare thing to have that consistency, and the band had such great songwriters in there, which is the hardest part to master. If you can keep writing hits, you're going to be the most in-demand person in the world, because that's the one thing that everybody would kill for, is just to be able to write a hit for every album. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!